The wind howled through the dense European forest, carrying with it the scent of ancient earth and damp leaves. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, as if the trees themselves had witnessed centuries unfold. For centuries, the village of Lorncrest had been hidden in the shadow of these woods, forgotten by all but the oldest maps. That was until the archaeological team arrived. The team had been investigating a series of ancient ruins, scattered like forgotten pieces of a puzzle, buried beneath layers of moss and ivy. Their work had been uneventful, but there was a persistent feeling that something was lurking just beyond their reach, something that had been waiting for them for centuries. Dr. Elizabeth Moore, the lead archaeologist, stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon. The ruins were located in a forgotten part of the forest, far from any path or civilized area. She had a sense of excitement and dread coursing through her veins, something she couldn't quite place. "Dr. Moore, over here," one of her team members, Adam, called out from the shadows. She turned to see him standing by a large stone wall, partially covered in moss and ivy. At first glance, it appeared to be just another piece of the forgotten ruins, but as she approached, something about it felt different. "What's this?" Elizabeth muttered, crouching down to examine the wall. The stone was unnaturally smooth and there were faint markings etched into it, markings that did not belong to any known civilization. The symbols were unlike anything she had seen in her career. Adam leaned in closer, squinting at the markings. "I've never seen anything like this. It's not ancient Greek, not Roman, not even medieval. These symbols, they don't fit any of the patterns we know." Her heart raced. "We need to translate these. It could be something significant, maybe a key to understanding the entire structure." With her pulse quickening, Elizabeth dug into her pack and pulled out a notebook filled with references to ancient languages. She flipped through the pages, looking for anything that could provide a clue. As the rest of the team gathered around, a sense of unease settled over them, as though the wall itself were watching them, waiting. Suddenly, one of the symbols shimmered, faintly glowing under the touch of Elizabeth's fingers. She jerked her hand back, startled. "What was that?" Adam asked, his voice tight with unease. I don't know," Elizabeth said, her breath catching in her throat. But even as she spoke, she could feel the energy in the air shift, thickening like the atmosphere before a storm. Without thinking, she began to trace the symbols with her fingers, following the lines etched into the stone. As her fingertips grazed over one of the central markings, the wall seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone thrown into a pond. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, making their bones ache. "Stop!" Adam shouted, but it was too late. The ground beneath them trembled violently and the wall cracked open. A dark, yawning void appeared in front of them, stretching beyond anything they could comprehend. There was no light in the hole, only an overwhelming sense of cold, ancient darkness. "No. This wasn't supposed to happen," Elizabeth whispered, her voice trembling. But before anyone could react, a force unlike anything they had ever felt before sucked them toward the opening. Screams filled the air as the team was torn away from the world they knew, pulled through the darkness, their senses disintegrating like sand in a storm. When the world snapped back into focus, they found themselves standing on the edge of a vast, barren wasteland, one that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The sky above them was a sickly shade of green, swirling with dark clouds that pulsated like a living thing. The air was thick with a strange, choking mist, and in the distance they could hear a faint echo of something ancient. "What is this place?" Adam whispered, his voice hoarse. Elizabeth looked around, her mind racing. We've crossed into something. A different time, a different reality. But how?" A soft, rhythmic thumping began to reverberate through the ground, growing louder with each passing second. The team stiffened, their hearts pounding in their chests. Is it coming from the wall?" one of the team members asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, a figure emerged from the swirling mist, tall, with long dark robes that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was hidden behind a dark mask, and its movements were unnaturally fluid, as if it didn't walk but glided. The figure stopped before them, its head tilting slightly as it regarded them. Then, in a voice like the grinding of stone, it spoke. "You should not have come." A wave of fear surged through Elizabeth, but before she could react, the figure raised its hand, and the ground trembled once more. The wall, their wall, was no longer a mere ruin. It had become something else entirely, a gateway, a threshold between worlds, and it was about to take them somewhere they could never return from. Time itself had been fractured, and there was no going back. The ground beneath their feet continued to tremble, but now it felt less like an earthquake and more like the steady pulse of a heartbeat, one that wasn't their own. Elizabeth's chest tightened as the eerie figure loomed before them, the unsettling silence between its words pressing down on the group like a weight they couldn't escape. "You should not have come." The voice echoed again, sharp and reverberating like a sound from the deep, forgotten corners of the earth. The figure raised its arm, and in a single fluid motion, the ground seemed to split open beneath them. A blinding light flashed, so intense that Elizabeth instinctively closed her eyes, feeling the heat radiating from it. When she opened them again, she realized the world had shifted. The barren wasteland they had just seen had vanished, replaced by something altogether different. They stood at the edge of a vast city, but not a city from any time they recognized. Towering spires of black stone, twisted and contorted in unnatural shapes, reached into the sky like skeletal fingers. The streets were empty, yet there was an oppressive sense of presence, as though the city itself was alive, and watching them. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a mix of mold, rust, and something far older. "What is this?" Adam muttered, his voice trembling as he took in the twisted, ghostly landscape. I don't know," Elizabeth stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "But this place feels like we've crossed into the past. Or maybe, somewhere beyond it." The figure in the distance, still hidden in its robes, did not speak again. It simply stood, its presence casting a shadow that stretched across the city like a dark omen. Then, as if it were not bound by time or space, it began to move, not in a way that felt natural but as if it were sliding between moments, moving in and out of time. "Are we still in the same world?" one of the younger archaeologists, Clara, whispered, her face pale as she clutched her arms for warmth. "I don't think so," Elizabeth replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The atmosphere had a tangible heaviness to it, like the weight of the centuries pressing down on them all at once. The ancient symbols etched into the stone wall had not just opened a door, they had torn through the fabric of time itself. The city before them was silent, the sky above painted with swirling clouds of dark purple and gray. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, like the crackle of static before a storm. But there was no storm, only a suffocating silence. Not even the chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves could be heard. It was as though the world had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Without warning, a distant scream shattered the silence. It was a woman's scream, long and drawn out, filled with agony. The sound echoed across the empty streets, reverberating off the twisted buildings. Elizabeth turned, her blood running cold. "Did you hear that?" The others nodded, fear in their eyes. "We need to find shelter. Now," she ordered, her voice steady but edged with terror. They turned and began to move, their footsteps echoing on the cracked cobblestone streets. The air seemed to grow thicker, the shadows longer, as though the city itself were closing in on them. Their every step felt wrong, like they were intruding on a world that wasn't meant to be seen. As they walked, the air grew colder and the mist began to thicken, wrapping around them like a shroud. The oppressive silence returned, broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps. But then, just as Elizabeth was about to call out to the others, the mist parted, revealing a figure standing in front of them. It was a woman, her eyes wide with terror. Her clothes were tattered, as though she had been wandering through the streets for an eternity. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her pale face, and her lips were cracked and dry. She was shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Help me," she begged, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please, you don't understand, you don't know what's coming." Elizabeth stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you? What's happening here?" The woman's eyes darted around nervously, as though she could see something that the others could not. "It's too late for you, it's too late for all of us. You've opened the wall, you've opened the gate." The word struck Elizabeth like a blow to the chest. "The gate?" she repeated, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? What is this place?" The woman's eyes grew wide with terror. "This city, it's not real. None of it is real. It's a trap, a prison for the souls who fell before you. The wall doesn't just open doors. It opens times. It lets you step into the spaces between them. And once you're in, you can never leave." The woman's hands trembled as she reached out to Elizabeth. "You have to go back, you have to find a way to seal it, before they come." "Who?" Adam asked, his voice tight with fear. The woman's lips quivered, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate. Then, as though something beyond her control forced the words from her, she spoke. "The Watchers." Before anyone could react, the mist thickened again, and the woman screamed, a horrifying, bone-chilling scream that seemed to echo from every corner of the city. It was a scream of pure terror, filled with the kind of despair that sent shivers down their spines. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the woman vanished, disappearing into the thick fog with a final desperate cry. "Where did she go?" Clara gasped, looking around in a panic. "She's gone," Elizabeth murmured, her heart pounding in her chest. But what she said, "We've opened something we weren't supposed to." Adam swallowed hard, his face pale. What are the Watchers?" Before Elizabeth could answer, the ground beneath them shook again. This time it wasn't a tremor. It was as if the city itself were waking up, responding to their presence. The air grew colder still, and the city's twisted buildings seemed to groan and shift as though alive. Something was coming. The Watchers were no longer a distant threat, they were near. And they had no idea how to escape. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse, as if the very city was alive, and with each beat, a suffocating pressure filled the air. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat as the mist closed in around them, swallowing the city whole. The air was thick with dread, the once eerily silent streets now filled with the faintest whispers, voices that didn't belong to any of them, drifting like ghosts just beyond hearing. "We need to move. Now." Elizabeth's voice was taut, steady with the kind of urgency that only terror could bring. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began to walk, her footsteps quick and deliberate, the others close behind her. The city stretched out like a labyrinth, twisting and turning at impossible angles, the skyline an ever-changing distortion. The streets seemed to twist in on themselves, and though they moved forward, it felt as though they were going in circles, the same desolate buildings rising and falling before them. It wasn't just the sense of being lost that unnerved them, it was the fact that the city was alive. The walls of the buildings seemed to shift ever so slightly, as though they were breathing, and from time to time, Elizabeth thought she saw shadows flicker at the edges of her vision, darting just out of reach, watching them. A sudden noise broke through the oppressive silence, a low, rhythmic thumping. It was distant at first, but it grew louder with each passing second, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. Elizabeth turned, her eyes wide in horror. "Do you hear that?" she asked breathlessly. "It's them. The Watchers," Adam said, his voice cracking. He looked around frantically, his body tense with fear. "We need to find a way out." The thumping grew louder, more distinct, until it was unmistakable, a heavy, measured footstep like something immense, something ancient, moving toward them with slow, deliberate purpose. Each step reverberated through the air like the strike of a drum. Elizabeth's pulse raced as she glanced around. The city had become a maze, impossible to navigate, disorienting, with no clear path leading anywhere. The mist pressed in tighter, and the shadows that had once seemed distant now loomed larger, darker, more tangible. She could feel their eyes on her, feel the oppressive weight of unseen forces closing in. A scream broke the silence, the sound high-pitched and shrill. It was coming from behind them. "Run!" Elizabeth shouted, and without waiting for a response, she began to sprint down the street. The others followed suit, their footfalls a frantic chorus against the deepening thrum of the earth beneath them. The thumping continued, growing louder, until it seemed as though the very ground was shaking with each step of the approaching creature. The air was thick with the smell of decay now, a stench of something long dead. And through the mist, Elizabeth caught sight of it, just a flicker of movement, a dark silhouette, impossibly large, emerging from the shadows. She barely had time to react before a piercing shrill cry split the air, a sound so haunting and unnatural that it seemed to echo through her very bones. The mist parted for a moment, and there, in the street before them, stood one of the Watchers. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body cloaked in tattered black robes that seemed to shift and move of their own accord as if alive. Its face was obscured by a mask of pure white, but the eyes, those eyes, were visible. They were hollow pits of darkness, endless and consuming, staring at them with a malevolent, intelligent gaze. The Watcher didn't move. It simply stood there, unmoving, watching them with an intensity that made Elizabeth's skin crawl. The creature's presence was suffocating, as though its gaze alone could strip them of their very souls. "What do we do?" Clara gasped, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking louder would provoke it. "We keep moving," Elizabeth said, though her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what they were facing, but she knew they couldn't stand there. Not with those eyes on them. "Stay close." They continued to run, weaving through the twisting streets of the city, but the Watcher didn't follow. It simply stood watching. But it wasn't the only one. As they ran, Elizabeth began to notice more figures in the distance, each standing motionless, their hollow eyes fixed on them with terrifying focus. There were more of them, scattered throughout the city, appearing and disappearing like shadows in the fog. "We can't outrun them," Adam panted, his voice ragged. "They're everywhere." Elizabeth didn't answer. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know how to escape the city, how to outrun the Watchers. She could feel their presence closing in on them, suffocating them with every breath they took. Suddenly, one of the Watchers in the distance stepped forward, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Its long, bony fingers extended toward them, the air around it crackling with dark energy. The mist parted before it, allowing it to step into their path. "Stop," the creature spoke, not with its mouth but directly into their minds. The voice was cold, ancient, and filled with an unsettling power. "You cannot leave." Elizabeth's heart stopped in her chest. "Why?" she forced out, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" The Watcher's head tilted, as though considering the question. Its voice came again, colder this time. "You have opened the gate. Now you are part of this place. You are bound to it, bound to time itself. There is no leaving. There is only waiting." "What do you mean?" Adam shouted, his voice shaking with fury. "We don't belong here. We didn't choose this." The Watcher's hollow eyes fixed on him, unblinking. "It was never a choice. Time is not yours to control. You are merely visitors, trapped in a cycle that has existed long before you. And when you step through the wall, you step into eternity." With that, the Watcher raised its hand, and the air around them seemed to pulse. Time itself began to bend, twisting around them like a living thing. Elizabeth's vision blurred as though she were being pulled in all directions at once, and the world around them seemed to unravel. And then, everything stopped. For a heartbeat there was nothing. No sound. No movement. No time. The world was frozen in place, and Elizabeth felt her very existence teetering on the edge of nothingness. But then, as the seconds stretched into infinity, a voice, low and ancient, spoke from the depths of the void. "You are trapped here in the heart of time itself. And now you will wait." The words echoed in her mind, and the mist began to thicken once more. The Watchers were no longer just figures in the distance. They were closing in. And as Elizabeth looked around, she realized they weren't just watching. They were waiting. And they were no longer alone. The world once again began to move. Time reasserted itself with a shudder, the momentary stillness fading as the fog thickened, swallowing everything in its path. Elizabeth could feel the weight of the Watcher's gaze pressing down on her, heavier than the dark, suffocating air. It was as though the very fabric of reality had unraveled, leaving them stranded between the cracks, caught in the eternal moment of their own demise. The city, however, seemed to respond differently now. The buildings, once twisted and distorted, now shifted and warped with more purpose. The shadows, those lurking horrors just outside their vision, were no longer content to merely observe. They were moving slowly, steadily, closing in like predators encircling their prey. Elizabeth staggered backward, her heart racing, her pulse pounding in her ears. We can't stay here," she gasped, turning to the others. "We need to get out of the city. We need to." "Where can we go?" Clara interrupted, her voice trembling with the panic that had been mounting ever since they crossed into this nightmare. She glanced around, wide-eyed, as if expecting the world itself to collapse around them. "There's no escape. We're stuck here." Elizabeth shook her head, trying to focus through the rising panic. "We can't give up. We have to keep moving. If we stop, we'll die." Adam finished for her, his voice strained. "We're already dead, Elizabeth. This place, this time, it's not real. It's a prison for souls that have been lost. We're just echoes of something that was once here." His words sent a cold shiver down Elizabeth's spine. He was right. They weren't just stuck in some city out of time. They were trapped in the folds of time itself, between moments that stretched and fractured like cracks in a shattered mirror. The Watchers weren't just guardians, they were the keepers of the dead, of lost souls, of people who had walked into this place before them and never left. The echoes of their lives lingered in the cracks of time, repeating endlessly, trapped by the ancient forces that bound this place together. "I don't care if we're dead," Elizabeth said, her voice gaining strength despite the terror that threatened to overtake her. "We're not staying here. We can find a way out. There has to be a way." Adam's eyes darted toward the flickering shadows that slithered along the edges of the city, his face pale. "What if there's no way out? What if we've already crossed the point of no return?" Before Elizabeth could respond, a sound rippled through the air, a low, guttural hum that vibrated deep in her chest. It felt as though the entire city was singing, an ancient, mournful song that reverberated through every building, every street, every soul trapped here. The sound grew louder, pulling them toward it. It wasn't a song of life, of hope. It was the wailing of the forgotten, the cries of souls bound to this forsaken place. "We have to follow it," Elizabeth said, her voice barely a whisper, as if the song itself was calling her. "It's a signal. It could lead us somewhere, anywhere, away from here." The others hesitated, but the compulsion was undeniable. With no other choice, they began to move, their steps unsteady but determined, following the sound that seemed to guide them, pulling them deeper into the heart of the city. The streets twisted and bent in ways that defied logic. Every turn felt wrong, every corner leading them further into the heart of the labyrinth. And yet, the hum of the song grew clearer, sharper, pulling them onward. There were moments when Elizabeth thought she saw faces in the windows of the buildings, pale, twisted faces, distorted with horror, eyes wide in silent screams. But when she blinked, they were gone, leaving only the empty buildings and the relentless pull of the song. As they rounded another corner, a sudden silence fell. The air thickened and the mist parted just slightly, revealing a large structure ahead, an ancient stone archway weathered and cracked, standing at the intersection of 3 roads. The stone was carved with symbols, jagged and old, the same symbols they had seen etched into the wall that had opened the gate to this place. "This is it," Elizabeth whispered. "This is the source of the hum. This is the heart of the city." But as they drew closer, something shifted. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the air vibrating with energy. The archway seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living thing. The stone groaned, and for a fleeting moment, Elizabeth thought she saw someone, move within it. A figure stepped from the shadow of the archway, its form tall and thin, dressed in tattered robes that billowed like smoke. The figure was hooded, its face obscured by a dark veil. It moved silently as though floating above the ground. "Who are you?" Elizabeth demanded, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "What is this place?" The figure did not respond. Instead, it raised one long bony hand and pointed toward the archway. The ground beneath Elizabeth's feet rumbled again, louder this time, as if the city itself were coming alive, awakening from a long slumber. The figure's voice came, not through its mouth but inside Elizabeth's mind. The words echoed, deep and hollow, as though they were part of the city itself. "You seek to leave," the voice said, "but you cannot. This place is not just a city. It is the nexus of all time, the crossroads between what was and what will be. The Watchers guard it. And once you pass through, you will be part of it. Forever. Forever." Adam repeated, his voice cracking. "What do you mean? We don't belong here. We just want to leave." The figure remained silent, and as it did, the archway seemed to pulse once more, its dark stone shimmering with an otherworldly light. The song, the hum, grew louder as though the archway itself was calling to them, pulling them in. "Elizabeth," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "We can't trust this thing. We can't just go in there." But Elizabeth, caught in the strange trance of the hum, felt herself being drawn toward the archway. She stepped forward, compelled by an unseen force. The others followed, though with hesitation, unsure of what they were walking into. As Elizabeth stepped closer to the arch, a vision suddenly struck her, images flashing, disjointed and chaotic. She saw the city in its prime, a thriving metropolis filled with life. Then she saw it crumble, falling into ruin as the Watchers descended upon it. And finally she saw herself, standing at the edge of the archway just as she was now, about to cross into something far darker, far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The vision faded, and Elizabeth snapped back to reality, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned to face the others, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to go through. It's the only way." And with that, she crossed the threshold of the archway, leaving the others no choice but to follow. As they stepped through the arch, the world around them shifted once more. The city faded into darkness, the ground beneath their feet crumbling away into a void that stretched endlessly into the unknown. The song grew louder, its eerie chorus rising to a deafening crescendo. And then the world stopped. They were no longer in the city. They were somewhere else. Somewhere worse. The moment they crossed into the darkness, the world fractured around them. Elizabeth's mind screamed to make sense of what she was seeing, but nothing made sense. The city, the archway, even the song were gone, replaced by an expanse of emptiness that stretched beyond sight, a void where time and space bent and twisted unnaturally. It was as though they had stepped into the very heart of the universe, where all the laws of reality had broken down. The ground beneath their feet was no longer solid, but a pulsating, shifting substance that seemed to breathe in time with their own hearts. There were no stars, no sun, just an endless blackness, Yet there was a strange, unnerving light that filled the void as though the very air itself was alive. Elizabeth took a tentative step forward, but the world around her warped with the movement, stretching and contracting like it was made of liquid. The others followed, their movements jerky and disoriented, as though they too were struggling to adjust to this new impossible reality. What is this place?" Clara whispered, her voice thin and shaky, barely cutting through the oppressive silence. "I don't know," Elizabeth answered, her voice trembling with unease. "But it feels like we're not just outside of time, we're in it. Caught in it." Adam staggered beside them, his face pale and his breath shallow. "I feel wrong. Everything feels wrong. Like we're moving through something we weren't meant to see." Elizabeth's gaze scanned the dark expanse, trying to find something, anything, that could offer them a clue. She had seen visions of the city, of the Watchers, but nothing had prepared her for this. It was as though they had been pulled into a realm beyond the confines of the world they knew, where every moment was both frozen and fluid, constantly shifting. Then there was a sound, a soft whisper in the air. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in a distant wind, but it grew louder, becoming more distinct. "Elizabeth." The voice was familiar, but warped, distorted by the oppressive emptiness. Elizabeth froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if afraid of breaking the fragile silence. The others nodded slowly, their eyes wide with dread. "Elizabeth, help me." The voice again. It was her name, but not her own voice. It was the voice of someone she knew, someone she thought she had left behind long ago. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, appearing out of thin air. At first it was a silhouette, but as it moved closer, Elizabeth's heart sank. She knew that face. It was her mother, standing before her, but twisted, distorted, and covered in shadow. Her mother's face was blank, her eyes vacant, her lips moving without sound. The moment the figure fully emerged into the dim light, Elizabeth gasped, her stomach turning in horror. Her mother was wrong. Her features were smudged, as though drawn hastily, her skin pale and cracked like the surface of an old painting. The air around her shimmered with an unnatural heat, and every step she took sent ripples through the space, like a stone sinking into water. "No," Elizabeth whispered, taking a step back, horrified. "This can't be real." But the figure reached out with a hand that was both familiar and alien, and whispered in a voice that scraped against her mind. "Do you remember me, Elizabeth?" it said, the words layered with an eerie, ghostly tone. "Do you remember who you are?" Elizabeth recoiled in shock. This isn't real. You're not my mother." The figure's lips curled into a smile, but it was not a smile of warmth or love. It was a smile filled with malice, as if it knew a secret that Elizabeth would never understand. "It doesn't matter," the figure whispered. "All that matters is that you are here. You have crossed the threshold. Now there is no escape. You are bound to this place. To time." Elizabeth's breath quickened as the air around her grew colder, the figure's presence intensifying. She looked back at the others, but they too were frozen in place, staring at their own horrors, their own visions that mirrored Elizabeth's. Clara's eyes widened in terror. Is it? Her words trailed off as another figure appeared behind her, a tall man in tattered clothing, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin that seemed to mock her every thought. Adam, too, stood motionless, his gaze locked onto a figure from his past, a woman he had lost years ago, now standing before him, her face contorted in agony. "Help me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't real, Elizabeth. This isn't." But Elizabeth didn't hear her. The figure, her mother, was moving closer, the shadows creeping from her fingers, reaching out like claws. Elizabeth felt her mind becoming fogged, a sense of dread crawling up her spine. "You are nothing but echoes," the figure said softly, its voice echoing in her skull. "None of you were ever meant to leave. You will remain in this place, lost in the endless stream of time, forever." "No," Elizabeth gasped, her eyes wide with panic. She took a step backward, but the ground beneath her feet shifted, stretching and contracting. The world around her felt like it was folding in on itself. There was no escape. She could feel it, the inescapable weight of time bearing down on them all. "None of us were meant to leave," she whispered, her mind racing. "We were never meant to leave." Suddenly, the figure raised both hands, and the void around them seemed to darken even further. The shadows grew longer, wrapping themselves around the group like suffocating tendrils, pulling them deeper into the heart of this nightmare. The world began to spin. Time fractured. Memories bled into one another, blurring past and future into a twisted, grotesque panorama. The last thing Elizabeth saw before everything went black was the glowing eyes of the watchers, staring, unblinking, watching them fall into the void. And then, nothing. Elizabeth awoke with a gasp, her body jerking upright as if the very air had been sucked from her lungs. She was lying on the cold, damp ground. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself into a sitting position, her eyes blinking rapidly, trying to make sense of the darkness that surrounded her. For a brief moment she wondered if she was still trapped within that twisted world, but there was something different about this place. A certain stillness that made her heart ache with a mixture of relief and confusion. She looked around and the others were there too. Adam, Clara, their faces pale and drawn, were slowly stirring, as if coming back to life after a long, unfeeling slumber. They all seemed dazed, unsure of where they were. But one thing was undeniable: they were back. The city, the archway, the haunting figures, they were gone. The oppressive dark void, the warped time, all of it had vanished. In its place was something familiar yet foreign. They were standing in a small, abandoned village, the same one that had appeared in their visions. The air was still, the houses crumbling and forgotten, their windows like hollow eyes watching them with an eerie silence. It was as if the world had been paused for them, waiting for their return. Elizabeth stood up, her legs shaking beneath her, and took a tentative step forward. The others followed, though they did so slowly, cautiously, as if unsure that the ground beneath them was truly solid. Where are we?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for any clue that would explain their return. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. I think we're back where it all started. The village from the visions. The one that led us to the wall." Adam clenched his fists, his brow furrowing. "The wall? The time we crossed. That wasn't just some experiment. We weren't supposed to mess with it, were we?" "No," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with understanding. "None of us were supposed to cross it. We weren't meant to see the things we saw, to feel the weight of time like that." As the words hung in the air, a sudden realization struck her, a painful clarity. They had not just been lost in time, not just wandering through an endless nightmare. No, what they had witnessed had been a reflection of their own fears, regrets, and futures. The wall, the entities, the voices, it had all been a manifestation of their deepest, most hidden truths. And yet, here they were, standing together, seemingly untouched by the horrors they had faced. The broken pieces of time, the endless loops, the shifting realities, they were gone. But as Elizabeth turned to face her companions, something shifted in her heart. Something had changed deep within the core of her being. She wasn't sure what or how, but she knew that the world they had left behind, the place they had crossed into, wasn't entirely gone. It lingered, like a shadow that no light could dispel. She glanced at Adam, who was looking down at his hands as if expecting them to be warped, changed by the strange world they had left behind. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. He nodded, his voice distant. "Yeah, I do. It's like we've been marked. Like we can't ever truly leave it behind." Clara, her eyes wide with confusion, added, "So, are we cursed?" "No," Elizabeth whispered, though her words lacked conviction. "Maybe. But we're here now. That's what matters." For a long while, the three of them stood in the middle of the abandoned village, each lost in their own thoughts. The silence stretched out between them like an unwelcome guest. Then slowly the village seemed to begin crumbling, the edges of reality bending once more. Buildings groaned as if they had been standing on the brink of collapse for centuries, but the ground beneath their feet remained firm. There were no more time loops, no more walls to cross, no more watchers. Only the weight of their experiences, the strange and unshakable feeling that they had witnessed the impossible, and somehow lived to tell the tale. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the broken rooftops, Elizabeth turned to face the others. A sense of finality settled over her, a quiet understanding that the world they had encountered wasn't just a world of twisted space and time. It was a world born of their own minds, their own darkest fears. It was a reflection, a warning, a place to confront the things they never dared to face. "Maybe this place," she began, her voice steady now, "wasn't just a punishment. Maybe it was a gift. A chance to see things differently. To understand our own limits, our own choices." Adam didn't respond right away, but when he did, his voice was full of quiet acceptance. "A gift, or a warning. Either way, we're here now. And we survived." Elizabeth looked at Clara, who smiled faintly, though her eyes were shadowed by the weight of everything they had been through. "We're not the same people we were before," Clara said, her voice soft but filled with resolve. "But we're still here." They all stood in silence for a moment, the sun rising higher above the horizon, casting long shadows over the village. The world seemed to breathe once more, and as the wind picked up, Elizabeth felt the weight of time shift, no longer a force that could trap them, but something they could now move through cautiously, carefully. And then, without a word, the three of them turned and began to walk toward the horizon, leaving behind the village, the wall, and the horrors of time. The story they had lived was one that would linger in their minds forever, but as they moved on, they knew one thing for certain: they had crossed through time, and returned. But the true question remained: would they ever truly be free? This is a fictional story. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.